Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I kind of jumped the snap on you at the beginning of this podcast and hit record before you were ready to hit record, and you looked up with a startled look on your face. And now I've promised you before we started that I would remember to edit that out, and I guess our listeners and viewers will find out if I did in fact remember to edit that out. But it is my solemn pledge to you that I promise to try.
Well, that's pretty big of you, because there have been times where you have not promised and not done it, and the beginning has been kind of not as I would have preferred, not as flawless as we normally do it. There have been times where you have left a flaw or two in, but you know what? If I wanted, I guess I could do it myself. If it was really that much of a concern, I would take this on to make sure that I never left, none of my flubs were ever included into the show. But that's just way too much work.
Yeah, if we were striving for perfection, this would be a very different podcast. But here we are,
and much shorter.
It's the one you're listening to, so you're in this with us. So sorry.
You know what the show is by now anyway. So today we are talking about the Ohio State defensive line, previewing the defensive tackles and defensive line and defensive ends as we head into spring ball. And probably going to be a pretty good defensive line. And as we always do, we start out with the depth chart. And Tom, this is not easy because we have to talk about the who's playing where and which defensive end is at the hybrid position and who's on the strong side. And I don't even know how you go about putting a depth chart together when you don't exactly know which is Zach Harrison. Is he strong side? Is he weak side? What is JT Tuimoloau? Like, I don't know where these guys line up. I don't know, other than defensive end and defensive end. Like, I would like to know what Jim Knowles is thinking now that he's had a chance to see these guys and who he wants to put where. And until we know that, I think and not even to get into is Tyleik Williams moving to nose. Like, there are so many moving parts right now in the defensive line that I don't even know that you can put together a depth chart unless you would like to try.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of try, because I think one of the big changes this year is that in the past, it has sort of felt to me like the two defensive end spots were a little more interchangeable than they are in the Jim Knowles defense. When we talk about the Leo, which I'm sure you've heard us talk about 1,000 times in the Jim Knowles defense, that's basically the weak side defensive end. So when we're talking about whether it's Zach Harrison or Jack Sawyer, who you've heard, Cade Stover, all these people who've kind of had their names thrown out as he might be a Leo. He'd be a great fit for the Leo position. That's the weak side defensive end. I think the depth chart is probably some combination of those names. Let's say it's Zach Harrison, and then Jack Sawyer, and then Cade Stover. That's just a ballpark. And then, Caden Curry, does he fit in there? Is he going to be a strong side defensive end? Javonte Jean-Baptiste could be over there. And then the other side, the strong side defensive end, that feels like that's a JT Tuimoloau spot to me. Tyler Friday, is Javonte Jean-Baptiste there? Do they put Caden Curry over there? I mean, you've got, you're probably going to see guys playing in a couple different spots throughout the course of the spring. But those are a little bit more different positions than they have been in the past at Ohio State.
You basically answered the question by saying, no, actually, it's pretty cut and dry, and then you just also had as much mystery in your answer as I did. Just so you're aware. I'm not sure if you missed that part. I do wonder if we see the Leo and the movement of it more in the spring than we do in the actual season, because Big Ten football is a little bit different than Big 12 football, and I'll be interested to see eventually how that gets employed. But if this is going to be part of what you want to do, you got to see who can do it in the spring. So you could see all kinds of guys getting that opportunity. And I know when Alex and I tried to put together the starting lineup on offense and defense, I had Zach Harrison as the strong side. He had him as the Leo, and you can make a case for either one of those. He's tremendously athletic. He is also like 6'6" and 275, 280 pounds. Like he's the size of a strong side defensive end with the athleticism of a weak side defensive end. So I guess, what can he do? What do you want to do with him? And if you're just looking for him, a lot of times the Leo is just, sometimes you just want him to plug a gap on the run game. He can do that as well because he's obviously big enough, strong enough, and it doesn't take much to plug a gap. But I think, Javonte Jean-Baptiste is now, this is his 5th year now. Tyler Friday, his 5th year. It's time for those guys. But, this spring, I think there's just going to be a lot of feeling out. Larry Johnson knows what he has, but Jim Knowles doesn't, and so he's going to want to see it. And so then when we discuss the biggest questions of the defensive line, like I've got some, like who is where on the interior? How do they figure that out? And then will those guys stay there? And Tyleik Williams played 3-tech last year, played it very well. But do they, he's going to be behind likely Teron Vincent, but Teron Vincent also played some nose tackle last year. It started there once or twice, but you've got Jerron Cage back. Is Jerron Cage, obviously he's a nose tackle, but is he the best that Ohio State can do at nose tackle? And I think maybe some of those questions start to get answered this spring, depending on the movement that they have. Like, we know in the past they've tried to cross-train guys, and they've Haskell, Garrett, and Teron Vincent talked about that last year. Antoine Jackson, yeah, we play both. And I wonder, does that, I assume that's going to continue, and then you look to see, hey, who is actually playing the best, obviously. And Tom, do you think somebody can overtake Jerron Cage at this point? And if he's gotten better, obviously, every year, and I don't think he's a bad player by any means, but if he's the best you have at nose tackle, is that okay?
It's okay, but I think it's not necessarily what they're going to need to win the national championship. I think Jerron Cage, like you said, he early in his career was one of those people who I think we probably had on our, a couple times on the pre-spring, like, boy, this guy just hasn't moved up the depth chart. This guy, he hasn't progressed. You kind of had him on that transfer watch list, and then he's played himself into a legitimate contributor to the team. I think you probably are looking for a little bit of a higher ceiling there at some point. And there's so many different moving pieces here. I mean, Teron Vincent, you mentioned. I think I would sort of have Teron Vincent penciled in at the 3-tech to start, and Cage penciled in at the nose to start. But then Tyleik Williams, where does he go? He's probably got a higher ceiling than than Cage does at this point. If they move him to nose, we've seen Ty Hamilton flash at the nose. Is that where he's going to end up? Mike Hall is someone who they just love. He's someone that could slot in at either of those spots. It feels like there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of talent there. And this may be a little bit of a, they try guys in a couple different spots, and much like the offensive line, who are the best 5, and then you sort of slot them in. Who are the best 2 on the interior, and then you slot one of those guys in nose and one of them at 3-tech, and you roll with that.
I could see it being Tyleik Williams, you are a 3-tech for the first 7 practices, and then you're a nose tackle for the second half of practice, second half of camp. And then you weigh that, how did they do? And you get as much of a look at both positions as you can for each guy. And then you go with, then you build from that and get them into fall camp at the weight that you need them and the strength that you need them for the role that you think they are going to play. I'm wondering also, in terms of questions, guys like Jacoby Cowan, Noah Potter, assuming he's healthy, like, he's been spent much of his career unhealthy. Jaden McKenzie, can any of these guys start to make a move this spring? These are guys that some would say wouldn't have gotten offers in certain years, but they've been here now, and they've been here for a while. And can they finally take that next step to more than just being because right now Jacoby Cowan, if he's a defensive end, he got passed by 2 true freshmen last year. We saw what happened. Darian Henry-Young decided to transfer because he had gotten passed. This is a big spring for a guy like that. Guy like Jaden McKenzie, defensive tackle. Guy like Noah Potter, who moved from defensive end to defensive tackle. those kinds of guys, those three in particular, and probably maybe somebody else I'm forgetting in there, where this is kind of make or break. If it doesn't happen this spring, then you have to start looking at the guys also coming in. Like, are you going to get passed by them? Does Caden Curry move past, say, Jacoby Cowan, both playing defensive end, and the writing it's on the wall in neon for guys after a spring where you are expecting to maybe make a move and you don't. So I'll be watching that as well.
Yeah, that third year is typically where you see guys sort of, when you get into this is the make or break season for this guy. It's typically that third, fourth spring, and Cowan and Jaden McKenzie and Noah Potter. Noah Potter, I think, is maybe a little bit of a different conversation because he's had so many injuries. He had kind of a weird, he had like an eye thing last season. So he's kind of had he's kind of gotten derailed by that a little bit. So maybe he's not quite as much in this camp, but you mentioned Darian Henry-Young. Cormonte Hamilton was kind of in that boat as well, where he'd been around for a few years and just, never really broke into the rotation. And with the talent coming up behind him, it was kind of like, I don't know that this is going to happen. So he transferred. I don't know that he's landed anywhere yet, but he seemed like he would be a very natural fit with Memphis and Matt Barnes, because that's where he's from. So we'll see where he ends up. But, you've got guys who, those are two guys you mentioned, the two North Carolina guys, McKenzie and Cowan. Those are guys who I think this is a very big spring for, because, you have a fresh start. You have, if you think, well, the old defensive scheme didn't really fit me well, you're doing some new stuff now. You have an opportunity. You've got a lot of new eyes in that room. You have a chance to prove it, and you've got 15 practices to do it. So let's see. And McKenzie on the inside, he's another guy who could slide in either of those two spots. Potter, you mentioned, went from defensive end to 3-tech. So he's got an opportunity to potentially get in that rotation behind Teron Vincent somewhere. But, this is a big spring. It'll be very interesting. We don't get to watch a ton of practice generally, but, it's always interesting to see the first practice of the spring, where are guys and what order are they repping in? And then, like, practice number 10, how has that order changed? Because a lot of times that will tell you pretty much all you need to know about the trajectory of a guy's, career at Ohio State, whether it's going up, going down, or just kind of like staying static. So we'll see how that starts, how that process starts in just a little over a week or so.
It is always fascinating to watch. Okay, so this is where, say, Darian Henry-Young is repping on the first spring practice, and then, when we're there a month later, he's either moved up or he's not moved up, and you make your your educated guesses. You're reading the bones at that point with all of these guys, as we've talked about in the show in the past, where we don't get depth charts, but you have to make inferences and assumptions as you can. And really, is it 100% no? But it's more information, and it's not generally all that inaccurate. Like, if a guy is repping last, that's not because he's a starter, unless he's, the 2,000 rep club or whatever. And it's like, well, okay. John Simon does not need any more reps. Okay, we get it. He's fine. But it's also, I think it's a very big spring for Tyler Friday. Mm-hmm. And, where is he health-wise, I think, is another question. He was missed all of last year, has been around forever now, 5th year, and wants to be a leader. I'm sure he is a leader, but will want to be a leader on the field as well. And so what is the word on him this spring? Tyler, Larry Johnson will be effusive in his praise of Tyler Friday, as he is with most guys. So I'm interested to see where he is. And I know pretty much everybody just wants to talk about Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau. Where are they? I expect there's going to be so much talk about those guys, but also I think they begin to back it up. And I think JT Tuimoloau, more so than most, is just one of the more advanced guys that we've seen come through the defensive line at Ohio State to be able to do what he did after not quite just getting off the plane, but he was as late arriving as anybody could be, and he was in the lineup pretty quickly. So that's impressive. What does he look like now?
Yeah, he's someone who I'm going to be interested to see. Okay, now Coach Mick has had him for a little while. How different does he look this year? Because he had been training and working out in Washington, but he didn't have like the traditional senior season necessarily, because they played in the spring, I believe. So he didn't have that fall season. He'd been working with trainers and all that kind of stuff, but he wasn't in with Ohio State's training staff during the spring. And he just walked on campus, and we went, well, okay, you got to be real patient with him. And then boom, first game, he's out there. So yeah, I am real intrigued to see what he looks like, because he's another one of those guys where you have the pedigree. You've sort of seen it already. Like, he was making plays in the Rose Bowl. He made plays in the Indiana game. He was out there making plays kind of throughout the season. Now he's had a little more time. Now he's grown a little bit. Now he's gonna, he's had more time to work with Coach Johnson and all that kind of stuff. So I think he's going to be a very interesting person to watch this year. I mentioned the North Carolina guys earlier as two people who this was a very big spring for. The two New Jersey guys, Tyler Friday and Javonte Jean-Baptiste, this is a big spring for them as well. I mean, they've had kind of similar careers where they came in and similar careers for very different reasons. Friday came in a little more physically ready. Jean-Baptiste had to just put on a ton of weight. So Friday started a little ahead. And then Jean-Baptiste has kind of caught up because Friday was hurt all of last year. And so Jean-Baptiste obviously played a lot more than Friday did last year. But they're both in that spot where going into their fifth year, they probably are not where they ultimately want to be. They're, neither of them has cemented himself as a starter for various reasons. And so this is the year when that could potentially happen. Not necessarily even a starter, but at least just a very solid rotational player, a real impact player. We talked earlier. Does Jean-Baptiste play on the weak side? Does he play on the strong side? Maybe that weak side is maybe that's a spot where he fits better. And, can Friday stay healthy? If Friday is healthy this spring, if Friday can stay healthy, he's someone who you've seen enough out of him over the years to feel like he should be able to contribute if he can stay healthy and stay on the field. But can he stay healthy? Can he stay on the field? That's going to be one of those another one of those things you kind of keep an eye on this spring.
So together, those two have combined for 8 years on campus so far. Mm-hmm. Do you know how many career sacks they have together, Tom?
5?
7.
7. Okay.
So
yeah, I mean, it's just, they've played a little bit, and it, like I said, it's been different reasons, but it's just they have not ever gotten like consistent playing time. It feels like if things come together, they could match. I'm not expecting 15 sacks between the two of them this year, but the two of them could, they could have 6-7 sacks between them this year, and that would be a pretty good fifth season.
It surely would be, considering what they've done. And I think, when they've been healthy, they've played. I think Javonte Jean-Baptiste has played quite a bit. There's just not been a lot of production there, but I think both these guys are veterans. They'll lead a young line. Zach Harrison will obviously as well. And it'll be interesting to see how they blossom, or I wouldn't say struggle under Jim Knowles, because I don't expect anybody on defense to struggle in terms of production now that you're looking at a more aggressive defense, but certainly some questions up front. Now, in terms of the biggest concern, because there's tons of talent, you assume everything's going to work out, that they've got starters, they've got 8 or 10 guys that they'll play. I think the biggest concern probably is just Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles meshing, Jim Knowles' defense meshing with what Larry Johnson does and what he prefers to do, what he's always done, and Jim Knowles being able to get what he wants out of that, or, does somebody have to acquiesce? Does somebody have to give in, or is it smooth? Is there no giving in? Does everything fit like a glove? Because I don't know that it will, but you work on that in practice, and you figure out like, well, this matches with what we do here. This works. This has not worked. We've tried it. You've seen it in practice. It's not working. So we need to do this. I also think maybe some of this will be like proof of concept for Jim Knowles, saying, I wanted it to do it this way. And you wouldn't, and you saw it happen. And then when we finally did get it my way, you saw the increase in disruption. And so I wonder if there's some of that in spring where like Larry Johnson sees, okay, I see it your way, and maybe there's some growth that way, or perhaps they just hit it off completely spectacularly. I don't know that can happen because you've got a very forceful two forceful defensive guys that you just wonder how well do they fit together, and how quickly, I guess, is the point, how quickly they fit together.
Yeah, and you're asking Larry Johnson, if you're going to run what Jim Knowles has run in the past, you're asking Larry Johnson to do stuff that's different than what he's done for pretty much his whole career. He has run the 4 down, 1 gap defensive line. That's kind of that's been his signature thing. Well, that's not really what Jim Knowles does. He'll do some different stuff up front, and they have brought in some other staffers and QC guys and other assistants to kind of help implement the defense at all the different levels of the defense. And so, you would think that would probably help with that transition, but it's, you're asking Larry Johnson to do some different stuff, and how well will he adapt to that? How well will what Larry Johnson has done in the past mesh with what Jim Knowles wants to do? These are all kind of open questions. And you've got lots of questions in the defensive line. We talked about all the different possible, configurations of this guy could be at this spot or this spot, and who's gonna slide in at 3-tech versus nose, or strong side versus weak side end. There's lots of questions there, but I don't know that there's a concern that there isn't talent there. It's like, which of these guys is going to fit? There's lots of talented pieces, and it's just how are those pieces going to fit together? The schematic piece, the coaching piece, I think that to me is maybe a little bit more of a concern in terms of getting everyone on the same page. Because if you're not on the same page, you can have friction in the coaching rooms and all that kind of stuff. Avoiding that is going to be a very big piece of having a successful defense right away this fall.
I also think it will be interesting where there may be some concern that Jim Knowles' defense, you can't do everything you did in the Big 12 in the Big 10. However, the offense that he is going to be facing every day in practice is maybe a little bit more Big 12 than Big 10. So how long does it take for you to find out that things need to be tweaked against certain offenses? It's probably not till the week of the game or the halftime of that game, where it's like, well, we need to change this. And so there's going to be some learning curves for Jim Knowles as well.
What's interesting is you look at, what's the first team that they're going to face this year? Notre Dame. Notre Dame does not necessarily run quite the Ohio State offense. Well, Jim Knowles has had a little bit of proof of concept of the Jim Knowles defense against Notre Dame, because that's who Oklahoma State played in the Fiesta Bowl last year. They played Notre Dame. And it was not, that Jim Knowles was not coaching that game, but he knew all the other assistant coaches. That was, they were not making massive changes from the Jim Knowles defense to what they played against Notre Dame. So you've sort of seen some of that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And and this is, you also got to remember the Big 12 now is not everyone is just running throwing 60 passes. Not everyone is Mike Leach, Texas Tech in the Big 12. That league has diversified its offenses somewhat. So Iowa State is maybe more similar to some of the Big 10 offenses that you'll see than some of the other teams you've seen there. So there is a little more diversity there in terms of the schemes that you're seeing in the Big 12. So that's worth noting. But yeah, I do think you're going to see, this is a challenge for a lot of teams. If you play a run heavy offense and your team is playing the run every week in practice, and then you're facing pass heavy defenses teams on the weekends, well, that's a difficult adjustment for people. And it's the same thing. This is the air raid defenses always have trouble defending the offenses they're playing, because they're playing like a very extreme version of an offense during practice, and then you got to adjust to a much more moderate offense during the game. So yeah, that is not a unique challenge, but I think that Jim Knowles is probably going to have a decent sense, at least to the start, and then they'll have to adjust. Wisconsin on the schedule, there's not a lot of teams that run stuff like Wisconsin, so the Wisconsin's on the schedule, Iowa's on the schedule this year, so you've got you've got some teams that are going to run some stuff that's a little bit abnormal for what he's used to facing.
Well, Tom, let's not forget Iowa now has a new quarterbacks coach in Brian Ferentz. So that's an offense that you. Good luck, Mr. Knowles. That's all I'm going to say.
I think my biggest mistake in life was not being fathered by a famous head football coach. I think that's maybe the thing that has held me back most in life is because, boy, that seems to be the main qualification for long and lucrative and continued employment regardless of on-field success.
Could have been a Bowden. Could have been a Ferentz.
Could have been a Paterno. Spread HD.
None of that. Spread HD, yes. I guess if the biggest concerns are Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles, then things are probably going to be okay.
Yeah, it seems like this is setting up for a pretty good year, and setting up for a better year than they had last year. And last year, felt like a disaster, but on the whole, it wasn't a complete disaster. But this year should be better, and I mean, it is really exciting to think. I'm sure Jim Knowles is like just rubbing his hands together with glee at looking at the talent he has to work with, because he got pretty remarkable results at Oklahoma State, and what he was working with at Oklahoma State is like a notch or two below what he's working with at Ohio State. So this is going to be really exciting to see what he can do with this.
So then, as we do, we take a quick look at what is going on at Michigan. They are currently in spring practice right now, although I think they've got the week off now. But their defensive line, obviously, Aiden Hutchinson, David Ajabo are gone. Starting tackle Chris Hinton is gone. All that is back is nose tackle Mozzie Smith. He is back. 37 tackles last year. Very. We were both surprised when we talked about this a few weeks ago. Like, we didn't realize he was so productive, because he's very quiet when you watch. Like, he does not stand out in terms of making plays or anything like that. And you look, he's like, well, 37 tackles. That's a lot, for nose tackle. But you look at who else is back, and really it's a bunch of guys that you've never heard of and that will have to make a name for themselves. Mike Morris has played. He's played defensive end, can maybe do some 3-tech stuff. They've got Braden McGregor, who's, I don't want to say a poor man's version of Aiden Hutchinson, but other people have said similar things. They just have to figure out who they're going to be starting there, and how much the defense is going to resemble last year's defense, and how much do they have the guys who can play that edge rush outside linebacker, like what Jalen Harrell was a guy who did some of that as well. So they've got guys, but to me right now they're just guys.
Yeah, and this to me gives off some 2020 Ohio State vibes, where the defense looked incredible last year, but how much of that was you have this elite top of the NFL draft pass rusher, and you really have two of them who are, a Chase Young can cover up for a multitude of sins behind him. They had a Aiden Hutchinson, they had a David Ajabo to cover up for a multitude of sins behind them. Now those guys are gone. Also, they lost their defensive coordinator. So this is a very similar vibe to the 2019 to 2020 Ohio State defensive shift. I think we have been overall pretty positive about the offense for Michigan and what that might look like this year. I think they're going to have a real good offense. I got a load of questions about that defense, and considering how much they leaned on that defense last year in a lot of places, that big questions there, I think, are a big concern. You do not, Aiden Hutchinson's and David Ajabos do not grow on trees. Those are guys who, Ohio State will churn out top 10 picks pretty frequently on the defensive line. That does not happen as often at Michigan, and you've just lost two of them. So do you have the talent to replace those guys immediately? I would submit that they probably do not. So you're going to see a little bit of a step back there, and a little bit of a step back there can lead to a significant step back, statistically across the rest of the defense, even before you get into, and now they've got now you get a new guy calling the defense. The guy who called the defense and came in and did a great job from the NFL, and who was like, wow, look at this sharp young coordinator. Oh, and he's gone in a year. Like, they got Jeff Halfleet. They got, with Mike McDonald. Mike McDonald goes right back to the NFL. So yeah, that's going to be a real interesting storyline to watch to me this year. Is How do they replace those guys? And can they replace those guys? Because I don't know that the answer is necessarily yes.
Yeah, they lose 6 of their top 7 TFL guys, and that doesn't include Christopher Hinton, who was number 12 on the team, and that with just 1.5 tackles for loss. So they take a huge hit, and we'll see how they respond. The recruiting is better now than it was a few years ago, but it's the few years ago that is now has to take over. And again, I will readily admit if I'm wrong about this, but right now it just feels like it's going to be a bunch of guys, and we'll see if they can pad some stats against a really bad schedule. Mm-hmm. And they will. I don't know that there's anybody that's outstanding. There's no Aiden Hutchinson. There's no David Ojabo that I can see. And granted, it'd be hard for anybody to kind of step up when those two are playing so much, and that's also been a criticism of the Michigan defense over the years is they don't play much depth because they don't have much depth. And so we'll see what that even if they've got a couple of frontline guys, mm-hmm. where is the depth as well, because that will obviously come into play eventually. So Tom, that will I think that will do it. Anything else on the defensive lines, Ohio State, Michigan, or otherwise?
That'll do it.
I want to thank everybody for joining us, Tom. We should probably do a live show at some point, but I don't know when.
We probably should at some point. Yes, the people demand it. We're not cowards. We will at some point go live. We'll find a good celebratory moment and go live at some point when we're all excited about something.
That would be nice. So that will do it for now. I want to thank you all for tuning in. As always, tell your friends, leave us a 5-star rating and review at your podcast platform of choice. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you guys later.